Good afternoon, class. In today's video, what I'd like to do is to continue the video that I started last time, where I went from completing the square, and this time we're going to go into the quadratic formula. So we take our results from last time, which was that ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, which leads to our new formulation of the quantity x plus b over 2a, quantity squared, plus c over a minus b over 2a, quantity squared. So we have this result, and what we're going to do is we're now just going to solve for x and let everything play out as one would hope to get something that might look familiar to you. So we do that. To do that, we isolate x. So in order to isolate the variable, we do the opposite operation that's being done to it. So in that case, I skipped a couple of steps because I didn't want to keep this, I didn't want to write out a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of steps. So I added b over 2a, quantity squared, to both sides of the equation, and I subtracted c over a to both sides of the equation to get this. Now, of course, you might say, whoa, that doesn't look the same as what you had over here, mister. And the answer would be, that is correct. What I did was I let that square run through, so b over 2a quantity squared is b squared over 4a squared. And then, in order to do what I wanted to do over here was to show that this is still c over a. It's just that there is an extra, I multiplied by 4a over 4a, because what I wanted to do was keep the denominator the same. Now, you know, that's the other trick. So in what you learned from the other video, in the completing the square video, was that if you add 0 to an equation, you can do that to one side of the equation only, and nothing changes, everything is fine, but you can sometimes get a useful result. In this case, the other trick is that you're multiplying by 1. So I basically multiplied c over a by 4a over 4a. And that works. You know, you get an interesting result because now I can combine these two terms because they've essentially become one fraction now. What I didn't, I got all of that just because I multiplied by 1. Otherwise, I would have to have two separate terms here, and there's not much you can do after that. But if you can combine them, you can get a little bit of an interesting result. So from there, I square root everything because I'm still on my quest of solving for x. So I square root both sides of the equation. So I get x plus b over 2a equals plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 4a squared. And this is probably starting to look a little bit familiar at this point, which it should, and that's good if you're noticing that. So from there, I would say, okay, and so we understand where the plus or minus comes from because I had to do a square root over here. So there we go. Next, I'm isolating the variable again, so I subtract b over 2a from both sides of the equation. I got negative b over 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. I take out this the square root from the denominator because this is 4a squared is actually a perfect square, so I can actually just resolve it. And if I can, and it leads to some result, great. You know, if it doesn't, then it doesn't. But if it can lead to something, then I'll take it any day of the week. So 4a squared, square root of that is just 2a, and as we notice, there's a 2a in this denominator, and there's a 2a in this denominator, so I can combine them now into one single fraction, which is x being equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all of that over 2a, which is exactly what the quadratic formula is. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a insight into where the quadratic formula comes from, and how that using, if you like completing the square or the quadratic formula, either one is fine. You can use both of them because they're both basically the same tool. So hopefully that gives you a little insight into that, so that when you tackle problems that are of this nature, you won't have to have any doubts about whether or not the tools that you're using are actually useful or not. So that concludes this video on the quadratic formula. Good luck in your studies, and may the force be with you.